Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin, owner of Team LoCoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
Hey y'all, I'm back with Blonde, aka Laurin. She's not Laurin, aka Blonde anymore. She's Blonde, aka Laurin. And if you didn't listen to the quarantine special last podcast, you see why we're a little silly. Actually, we're always like this. That'll be my excuse for this episode. But in any case, we have a pretty exciting one to go over today. Well, exciting for us because we're nerds. So not really that exciting, but we want to talk about transitioning in and out of tracking. And I know we did a podcast on this a while ago, but I think it's really relevant to kind of revisit. We have a pretty cool structure as far as kind of how we want to hit on different things. And this is something that we've been talking about a lot more with clients. And I think it's really pertinent to understand how to transition out of it and how to transition into it and kind of when to know all those nuances. And this is something that we're pretty passionate about. And, I've kind of developed this over the past, like all of 2019, I kind of started using this with clients, and now, 2020 particularly too. So it's been a cool thing because, before when I first started coaching, many years ago, it was just like, here's your macros. And, if you don't do macros, like you're a shitty coach. And it's like, whoa, if you just do that now, you're really missing the ball here. And something that we really focus on at Team LoCoFit is the communication aspect of it and the behavioral strategies perspective of it. And it's no longer just like, hey, hit your targets and like, let's see how that goes. Yes, that works to some degree for some types of goals, some weeks. But we're really trying to focus on a lot of other things as well, particularly on the communication and behavioral perspectives. So let's say, perfect example, somebody has been tracking like for a long time, right? They got in a really good groove of it. And maybe they either are starting to see some of the issues that we see with some very rigid tracking, or they simply just want to be able to handle, having a social life better or not having to track all the time. And this is kind of where it started to stem for me as a coach. Was I started to see all the same issues that supposedly we would only see with meal plans. And I started to see that with people who were tracking macros, and I started to realize that flexible dieting was not really that flexible unless you allowed it to be. So flexible dieting, as far as if it's your macros, to a very, very rigid degree, is pretty much has all the same neuroses that come with it that a meal plan does. And that was like what the dreaded meal plan was like 5 years ago, right? So I think now I've learned so much more as a coach. And, you obviously have a lot of experience with this too, Laurin. So it's, say somebody wants to just, where do I start, right? Like I've been tracking every day and I don't really know what to do or how to do it. And pretty much what I'll do, and same with you, is we'll just start slow. Hey, have one untracked meal this week, right? Like it's not like somebody comes to us and says like, I really want to work on my relationship with food, or I want to be able to socialize and eat. Or as a coach, you start to see all these issues and say, hey, like let's add this in, right? I don't just go, I just don't track ever again. That's horrible advice, right? Now, some clients might be able to transition a little bit easier, but it's never just going to be a 180 overnight. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. So starting with something like 1 untracked meal, then 2, maybe working in a whole untracked day. Like we're talking very slow steps with this, and this could take weeks or months with a client.
Yeah, this is a tough one because there's so many different scenarios here. So, and this is one of the biggest reasons why I think it is so important to have a coach when you're going through this for this exact reason. So, if you are somebody, the extent to which we kind of make the diet flexible is going to depend on the person's mental state, kind of their history and of their dieting and things like that, and just where they're at when they're coming to us with this request. And like Laurin said, the worst thing that you can probably do is go from tracking everything to, so here's the thing, there's kind of a fine line, right? Where like you're dieting. Maybe you're not dieting. Let's say you're not dieting for a show. There's not really a carrot dangling on a string at the end of all this. You're just kind of going. You have to almost be aware this is why it's important to have a coach. We can kind of pick up on little things throughout the check-in that might be red flags to us, that it's time for you to stop. Because what happens is if you're tracking and you're just on your own and you go down this deep, deep hole, you're going to get to a point where you're finally just like, fuck it. And then you just eat everything in the kitchen sink. Whereas we can maybe catch it and we don't tell you to, but maybe recommend that we end this diet and this tracking a little sooner than you had anticipated, or maybe you want to. But the reason is because then it's going to be a little easier for you to back off and come out of that rigidity and introduce some more lax practices. So for somebody that's really going to have probably a little more of a hard time, because like Laurin said, there's going to be some people that struggle a little more than others with this transition. Something that I like to do is, okay, are you weighing every single one of your meals down to the gram? Let's go ahead and not use the food scale, but let's use measuring cups. Something that's a little less precise, but will still give you a feeling of some sort of control. Okay, great.
Eyeballing it. That's a big
that can be.
Yeah.
Exactly. That can be even the next step if you want to go from measuring cup to eyeball, or just from food scale to eyeball. And I think that sometimes that can be first steps, as opposed to somebody hearing this and being like, oh, they're just going to give me a free meal, and like, then they might freak out, because everybody's different, and some people will be totally fine with that. So I think that's why it's so important to have a coach, because sometimes you just get so deep in this neuroticism of tracking that you can't even really recognize. And here's one last thing I want to point out is, if you think back to your dieting history, at least for me, I kind of went back and forth with tracking diligently and then saying fuck it for literally like 6 years. And everyone's like, oh, I've been tracking for 6 years. It's like, no, I was tracking like religiously, and then I stopped for 3 months and went off the handle, and then I came back to tracking. That doesn't count. There's a reason that you veer off, and it's because you cannot do it forever.
And I would argue and say that you can do some kind of structured eating forever.
Yeah.
But only when you have the right diet flexibility mindset. So a lot of people will hear us, and it's a very easy conversation to have with somebody who, not easy, it's a very easy example, example to have when somebody is very neurotic, right? So whether it's a, very type A client, like we can use ourselves, right? Like diligent, then falls off, right? Okay, that person obviously needs this kind of a thing, right? But the counter to that is somebody who kind of even struggles with dietary adherence, right? This person still needs diet flexibility, because guess what happens? They are faced with the exact same challenges, and their adherence issues come from either being very on or very off. So even though the personality and the neuroses might be slightly different, the end result is still the same. Most people, what ends up happening is that they're very on their diet or they're very off their diet. And that is where a lot of progress stops happening. And that's where you find yourself in a really negative loop for a really long time. And that's just the way that people do it and present it is going to look very different, but the end way that they handle it negatively is going to be the same. And that's where this diet flexibility is really going to come in. And again, we're not saying, don't have goals. And we're going to touch on that, of course, at the end. We're not saying don't care about what you eat. This is actually the exact opposite. Like, I probably eat better now that I fluctuate in and out of tracking certain things. And I'm not just like, oh, I have to track this exactly perfectly. Otherwise, whatever, it's over. You know what I mean? And we're going to touch on exactly what we do track now, because I don't necessarily track 3 numbers, but I track a lot of other things. So what do you think?
And I did just want to reiterate what you just said. Like, when I say you can't do that forever, I mean, you cannot pull out a food scale at every single meal every day for the rest of your life and measure everything down to the gram. That's what I mean.
Oh,
yeah. You can still have structure and like some sort of something. You don't have to be like, whatever.
And here's the other big thing. If you can't eat without your food tracker, that's a huge issue. And that's one thing, and I've talked about this before. I think I actually benefited a lot because I do not use a food tracker. I never do. So even when I do track and I am, very diligent about certain goals, I still do not use a food tracker on my phone. I write everything down. And I've always found that gave me even slightly more flexibility than some other people have had. And for my whole life, I've known what's in food. So even if I don't track it in the app, I don't need to look something up to know what's in there. I've eaten that a million times. I know what's in there. And if I don't know exactly what's in there, I know roughly what's in there, right? And that's why I think people get paralyzed. They either go, oh, it's 100% on or it's 100% off. And I've literally seen people have mental breakdowns when they do not know exactly what is in something. And that is the problem, right? Whether it's 50 carbs or 55, it's going to level out, right? Now, one huge question, and I guess you could say roadblock or anything that we run into with this, is kind of understanding what untracked, air quotes for anybody who's not watching the video portion, versus binging, overeating, free meal, cheat meal, all that is, right? When I say to somebody, hey, this week here's your numbers for 5 days, right? Like, here are your target macros for 5 days. Then 2 days out of the week that you choose, I want you to eat several meals beforehand, normal size meals. So let's say somebody eats 4 meals a day, have 3 meals, and then have your dinner untracked. This can be at home or it can be out. Any one of my clients knows that that's exactly how I phrase it, right? Be at home or out. And people are like, well, I'm already home. I can just track it. That's not the point. It can literally be the same dinner that you were going to have. I just don't want you writing down how much it is or plugging it in to a food tracker. That is the important distinguishing factor. Now, if you do go out and eat, you can do that. And you can order a chicken salad or you can order a pizza. And that is where people don't understand that every week it doesn't have to be a pizza and a triple cheeseburger and this and that, because the goal is not to stuff your face and to have a cheat meal. The goal is to simply eat a dinner untracked. And there will be variation here. And this is why, obviously, there's going to be different levels of like what we recommend for untracked meals depending on the client's goals. Of course, that's obviously an important distinguishing conversation, but that is something that can only be discussed on a client-by-client basis. But in general, if I'm saying to somebody, have an untracked meal, I understand that it's going to fluctuate. And it's going to be, some weeks it's going to be like, hey, nothing really came up, but I just, I made something at home that I really wanted to make, had a glass of wine and then, watched a movie. And other times it's going to be like, hey, it was my friend's birthday and we had the whole deal. We had 4 drinks, we had an appetizer, we had sometimes it's going to be like that, and that's okay. And the whole point is that you can do either of those, and then you wake up the next day and it's a normal day and it's a normal life, and you can just make adjustments from there.
Yeah, I word it pretty much the exact same way to my clients too. It's either you can kind of approach—
Wow, consistency.
Yeah, wow. You can kind of approach this how you feel is best. You can eat like you normally would, just don't track it. Or you can go out to eat and have something that is a little more outside of your normal routine and don't track it. And then something I also like to leave up to the client at first, especially that first week, just to kind of see how they do and what they need is you can either, if it's an untracked meal or something, I'm like, okay, you can either track the rest of the day around that meal if you want to have some sort of kind of like make sure you hit this protein goal, whatever, or you are free to not track at all. I will not give 2 shits. It's going to be up to you, but I do not want to see any part of that meal tracked. So I've had people come back to me that are like, oh, well, I went ahead and just kind of tracked it because I wanted to make sure. I'm like, no. I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing because I've done that shit. You don't want to fucking not track it. I get it. So guess what? Next week, you're going to leave that section blank. Okay.
And that's where the coaching part comes in. And that's something that obviously we can't say on a podcast because it's all going to be client dependent. And basically, the first one is always kind of like a, hey, let's just see what happens. Right. And then basically from that first time is where we make changes. Okay. Hey, do we set targets beforehand? Do we give recommendations for the meal? Do we just say, hey, don't track the whole day? Like, it's going to be very, very different depending on the client. And it can change week to week because the client can say, hey, I have this going on this week. I got a wedding. Not right now because we're in quarantine, but say you have a wedding. I'm not going to be like, oh, make sure you get these targets beforehand. No. Just, okay. Make sure you have some protein, get your fruits and veggies, make sure you drink some water, and then enjoy the day. Right. And then we can handle it afterwards. Like, there's just so many different things that have to be nuanced for a coaching relationship. And that's exactly what coaching does.
Also, what I would like to point out to any clients that are listening or anybody that's working with a coach is the importance of letting your coach know how you felt during that meal, around that meal, after that meal, because if there is some extreme, I know that I have had times working with Laurin where she would tell me to go have an untracked meal, and the anxiety that brought me.
Oh, I wasn't,
Yeah,
I was rolling my eyes because I distinctly remember one time you telling me that your untracked meal was like,
what's it, the cookies?
Cookie dough bites, and I was like, this bitch, like, because the way you said it was like, oh, well, I just had that. It's really what I wanted. I'm like,
no.
I listen, I can read through people pretty well at this point in my career.
That's what I was going to say is what people don't realize, and what I actually told a client the other day is the reason that we can call you out on your bullshit is because we have done all of it. I know every single trick in the book, okay?
Yeah.
So don't even try it. Just be honest. But I need to know those things because I might think that like, oh, she really like casually had that untracked meal, things went well. I might think that. And on the inside, you might have been like going into flames and like decombusting. Like, this is fine. Everything's fine. But like, and I think that people need to realize too, like, we don't want to make it, it's kind of the way you frame it in your mind, how we keep talking about, because this should not be something that you're like, if I restrict all week, I deserve to have this. No, also not the point. The reason that we're doing this is because this is real life. This is a more normal kind of situation. And we have to, like Laurin said, we have to be able to live outside of these numbers. And we're going to get into other things that we structure because neither of us track macros. So we'll get into that, but it is just simply to instill these normal eating habits and being able to trust yourself, not have to rely on an app or whatever the case. And it's so important. So I don't care how much kickback I get on it. We're going to do it. And eventually you're going to see, and I think what's important to see is with time, not much changes. Like, I think people are so scared to implement these things because they think they're going to go out of control or they think they're going to gain a bunch of weight. So when they don't repeatedly, it is so relieving. And I know that feeling as well. It's like, oh, I can go out and do that. And here I've been for years thinking I can't.
Because again, the difference is when we're saying to have an untracked meal or an untracked day, it doesn't mean it's a cheat day. It doesn't mean it's a free-for-all day. It means that you can actually live your life within certain dietary, you have to have some kind of dietary structure, right? If I just ate whatever I wanted all day, that would look a lot like fucking ice cream and peanut butter sandwiches and, you know what I'm saying?
Cereal, yeah.
I know I'm, being dramatic. Obviously, I love the food that I eat, but I'm just saying, like, there is some structure. There is some restraint. If you want to have any kind of physique, performance, and health goals, you have to care about what you eat. But the difference is I travel, and this is what I learned basically the most from, was in 2018 when I did my last prep, and I prepped for like 9 months, and I traveled a lot that year while I was prepping, and I had to eat out a lot when I was prepping. And I have to get pretty aggressive for anybody who doesn't know, because I haven't competed in a while, so people like don't think that I've ever dieted, I guess. For people like, oh, somebody reached out, they were like, oh, I know you don't track macros, so like, how do you do this? And I was like, I've dieted for like my whole life. So just because I'm not currently writing down 3 numbers doesn't mean I don't know how to track macro. It's just so funny how
oh my God,
perceptions are, right? Anyways. So yes, I have dieted before, everybody. And basically what I learned was that, yes, I was always on top of it. I would go to the grocery store. I would have food delivered. I would bring stuff with me. Like, I was never like behind on stuff, right? But life happens and social things happen. And if I was going to be traveling and being a part of stuff, I was going to have to either go places and not eat, which I did many times, or, hey, I'm going to order something here and I'm still going to work it into my daily diet, which is very low, but it's going to work. And I did that so many times. I know that there's some coaches that say never eat out when you're on prep. Guess what? If you are a busy person who is doing a lot of things, it's going to come up. And I can order, a plain steak or a plain piece of fish and some steamed vegetables pretty much anywhere and make that work. So I chose to do that. And I chose that I learned a lot from that experience. And I started to realize, like, wow, I could implement this in the off season, not in a dieting situation. And I could also implement this with my clients. But I had to give them the tools to actually be able to do this.
Yeah. And then, so 2 things. One thing about going out to eat and stuff like that, when we are asking you to have an untracked meal and that particular week it happens to be that you're going out or something, we want you to order what you actually want to order, not what you think that you should order because you're still mentally tracking in your head. I just want to make that distinction because I have spent years of my life doing that, and I know that other people do it too. Mm-hmm. It doesn't count. You cannot still be calculating up here.
Yeah.
And making progress.
Other meals, you might do that. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And that's fine. Say you're traveling all week for a work event. We're not saying every day has to be blow it out of the water with food, right? It means, hey, most of the meals are going to be meals that are going to hit my dietary goals. And then there's going to be a few meals that are going to be like, hey, a little more indulgent, and it's going to be what I want, and this restaurant's amazing, or they have the best drinks ever here, or whatever, right? And that's where I think that understanding this is so important, because again, everybody's going to go about it a different way, but the results are still the same. Whether you're super, super type A and afraid of eating out, right? You're at some point going to crack. Or if you're somebody who is very, very struggling with adherence, right? But you are very strict for a little while and then you fall off again, those still look exactly the same. And those both are examples of when you don't have true diet flexibility and understanding of what to eat. So now just because myself and you do not track 3 numbers does not mean that I do not track anything that I'm doing, whether it's, obviously we can talk about other stuff, but just diet. I pretty much, this is how I structure my days. I eat 4 protein meals a day. That's what I do. I have breakfast, lunch, dinner, and then I have a post-workout shake. And depending on the type of training that I'm doing, whether it's lifting or jiu-jitsu, I will typically have a shake with some carbs, and that could be like cereal, or that could be like some kind of like toast, a little bit of nut butter, whatever it is, right? So I'm typically having 4 protein meals, 3 whole meals, a shake, and a snack with that. That's what I'm doing, right? Now, obviously there's going to be some times where that's a little bit different because of traveling and because of some crazy stuff going on. But every time I sit down and I eat, I think I need about this much protein, which looks about this much. I need to have vegetables. I need to have fruit. And for me personally, what works better for my body, my metabolism, my genetics is a lower fat, higher carb approach. That's what works for me. So when I sit down, I say I need to make sure that whether I'm eating at home or I'm eating out, I am moderate with my fat intake, whether it's added fats. So because I love red meat. That's pretty much what I eat mostly. So I'm not going to have a lot of added fats if I'm eating red meat and eggs, right? I will eat added fats too. Like, everybody calm down. Don't worry. I'm not like bashing fats. I'm just saying I do better with a lower to moderate fat approach and then higher carbs. And so just with the diet, that's me not tracking, right? But that is still pretty structured. And because I've tracked for most of my life, I know what it looks like. Also, I still weigh certain things that are harder to eyeball, right? For me, for whatever reason, I don't know, I just always kind of struggle with the egg whites, right? Like and not even just from a macro perspective, but literally just from like, hey, I need how much to like buy and like how quickly we're gonna go through it. So typically like for breakfast, I have toast, eggs, egg whites, fruit, right? Pretty simple. I measure the egg whites. Obviously I don't have to measure anything else. And I eyeball the fruit, right? Good to go. Other stuff, is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to weigh that to the gram, right? But there's still some things that I'll weigh just to make sure that I'm either getting enough or not too much. So like, with meat and stuff, hey, I need to have about this much so I can easily eyeball it. Or if I want to just, making a few meals in a row, packaging them up, I'll just weigh it out. It's no big deal. But I'm not like, oh my God, is it exactly this much? Did I weigh it to the T? Do I got to write it down? No. Hey, I need this much per meal. Weigh a little bit of it, move on with my life. So just because that is not me writing things down or me logging into an app does not mean that I'm just willy-nilly saying, fuck it, I'm going to eat whatever I want and act like a child. So I think that is a huge distinguishing factor. And it's almost like, it's just funny to me when people say like, oh, you don't track, so what do you do? Nah, I just eat whatever I want. Nah, I just sit all day and eat fucking hot buns.
What do you mean, what do I do?
Yeah, like just Cheetos and bonbons on the couch. Like, what? No, I'm still like a normal, healthy person. And then of course there's going to be adjustments that naturally come up, right? So let's say it's 2 weeks ago was my birthday. We were going to go out for my birthday. I know for my birthday, I'm going to have obviously several drinks because I like drinking, and we're probably going to eat a decent meal, right? So beforehand, I'm not going to stuff my face that day. I'm going to be a little bit tighter with what I'm eating earlier. That just logically makes sense. Hey, I'll have my protein shake, but I'm not going to have other carbs with it after my workout because I don't really need it because I'm going to be eating more later. So you start to make adjustments without even really realizing it and just saying, hey, I'm going to moderate myself. And that's actually one of the key moderators of rigid versus flexible dieting restraint. So like the restraint model is flexible versus rigid dietary restraint. And flexible restraint, one of the big things is actual planning, like pre-planning, and the ability to moderate before and after. And that's something that I studied years ago in grad school, and it's something that I'm actually living right now, which feels pretty amazing, but it took a lot of years to get there. And I'd say that you're probably in the same boat too.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I have found something that is very, very important to me is making sure that I'm having 3 square meals at appropriate times. So I think that this is something that sounds simple, but a lot of our clients, especially just because I have sent out some food timing sheets and things like that. So a food timing sheet is essentially just a document that we can send to our clients that asks them to break down meal by meal what they're eating, their food sources, the macronutrient distribution, and the time that they're eating them. That gives us a really good idea of maybe like, why are they feeling so hungry at this time? Why do they feel like this in the gym? And then we can make suggestions from there. What I find a lot of times, especially with people that have some disordered background, is that those are very kind of all over the place. And maybe you're hoarding for the night, or maybe you're really heavy in the morning and just kind of snacking in the night. And it can just look very kind of like discombobulated almost. And I do think that it comes from a history of kind of having some disordered food behaviors and things like that. So for me, having that background, it is absolutely non-negotiable that I have 3 square meals at appropriate meal times. So whether that be, now obviously it's going to be a bit of a range because it depends what the day looks like, but that means breakfast is between 7 and 9, lunch is between 12 and 2, dinner is between 5 and 6. It's not lunch, it's not breakfast at 11, dinner at 8, 5 snacks, like that does not work.
And this is another key point of the, transitioning kind of away from some of the 3 numbers, and not even just transition away from numbers. What we started to realize was that, hey, we're giving people targets. I know how I eat, so I assume everybody else eats like that. Right. And that was a huge mistake I made early on in my coaching career. That's not true. Just because I eat a certain way absolutely does not mean that other people eat that way. So just because I have a really great understanding of what 4 protein meals look like for me, some people are not in that position. And that's actually what macros have created for them, is they don't have the actual background of basic meal timing and things that are going to help with their training performance, their recovery, their sleep, their hunger. So sometimes we have to not even track certain numbers, not because they have been so neurotic for a while, but because we need to backtrack 5 steps and say, hey, let's get a solid meal timing schedule going. That's going to be the first step that we need to do. And I've actually, talked to certain people recently, just kind of as like casual conversations, like helping them out with their diet and kind of whatever. And, the first thing people, just tell them what to eat. Well, what are you doing first? Right. And then you see it and you're like, whoa, okay, we got a lot to work on right now. So here's 3 easy things we got to work on first. Do that. Right. And that's kind of what we have to do to start with clients. And that's where, again, the coaching aspect of it really comes in, and the communication aspect of it comes in. If I just say, hey, hit 200 carbs, that might not be appropriate for some people. It might be great, right? There are certain clients that I have that are very advanced, have been doing this for a while. They know the drill. They know what to do, right? Other people are not going to be in that situation, and that's what they need help with. So before we even have the macro conversation, it's not that we're transitioning away from it because you need to, it's because we're not even here yet. So we need to figure out kind of these basics of nutrition before we even get there.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I think that goes either one of 2 ways with our coaching, because we are so behavior driven. Like what are your behaviors around food? What are your behaviors around meal times? Back it up, slow it down. And we're not just going to throw macros at you or whatever it is. And some people are very appreciative of that. And some people are like, where are my numbers? And it's like, okay, well, if you never figure out these barriers and how to get through them, or why you're feeling these types of ways, and you're just going to continue to do what you're doing, like you're never going to make progress in that sense. So we have to take some steps back sometimes and really just go to what feels like baseline. And it's not a regression. That's the only way you're actually going to be able to progress. And so maybe it is like, okay, I see that you're having your last real meal at 12:30 and then you're snacking the rest of the night. Okay, we're going to back it up here and make sure that you're doing 3 square meals. Like that is not a regression. That's just trying to implement something that's going to be a little more realistic.
Yes, realistic, healthy, goal-oriented. There's so many positive things. So you can't just look at, it can't just look at 3 numbers and that's the end all be all. And that's something that a lot of people in like kind of like the air quotes bro community always fought against with macros for good reason, right? Sure. I think that people were like, people just completely disregarded meal timing. People completely disregarded food quality. And that was a true pushback. Now, do I think that those things are the most important? No, but they are a huge fucking piece of the puzzle. So anybody who says, oh, it doesn't matter what you eat when you eat it, they're full of shit, because their answer to it, which is just track your macros perfectly, is not a good solution. That is not helping people for the rest of their life. That is actually, it's just, there's so many wrong things. And unfortunately I was, thought of things that way for so long, and I feel bad. But now I'm looking back and saying, like, gosh, we can't do this. You know what I mean? And a few years ago, I started realizing this, like, wow, there has to be more to it than just this. And thankfully, we've gotten to a place now where we really, really focus on the behaviors and the communication with our clients. And this has gotten them so many better results. And not just like, hey, what do you look like? But like, hey, I actually know how to eat. I actually have a good relationship with food. Hey, I can actually go and do things. I went on a vacation and I like maintained my weight and I feel great. And I don't feel like a piece of garbage when I got home. And like, those are the huge wins for us. So what else can we track? So outside of like what we just said with like actually structuring our food, like, which is super important. Again, just because you're not tracking 3 numbers doesn't mean that you can't have a schedule and, you know, structure with your food. We can also still track everything else. We care a lot about, okay, how was your training? What was your performance? Your recovery? How was your sleep? What does your digestion look like? What is your energy? How was your mood this week? Like, how is all this going on? Like, are you hungry? So many questions here. And then we also, for people who are more analytical, who do like tracking numbers, we still have stuff like that. We want to see roughly sleep numbers. We want to see roughly water intake. You can still track, you know, weight measurements. Of course, there's going to be times where we're not doing that either for clients. So things are always going to be oscillating, but there's still so many things we can track. We can literally just take out those 3 numbers and focus on every single thing else. And still, again, not tracking numbers, whether you're typically what I do for most clients is I'm blending tracking macros some days with untracked days. So it's typically like a half and half kind of a thing. Again, it will be very different for everybody. But that's typically what I'll do for a lot of clients in a off-season situation. And then when we're dieting, if somebody is like a competition prep client, you know, that's obviously a little bit more stringent because of the goal. So that's going to be typically fully tracked. But even for a lot of lifestyle clients, you can still have untracked meals and hit progress. Now, are there going to be weeks where it's like, hey, let's really like dial it back and really like hit these consistently and get fat loss moving more? Yeah, of course, that's where tracking things 100% is going to help kickstart that process, right? But it also doesn't mean that like forever when you're dieting doesn't mean that you can't have some more flexibility. It just might mean that like, hey, your untracked meal this week is going to need to be protein, veggies, and then you choose something. You choose a drink, you choose a split of dessert, you know, piece of bread. Like, so it's a little bit more of a, you know, structured, but it's still like, hey, I'm socializing. I'm still doing these things. And you have to put that work in before somebody's in a deficit in order for them to be able to handle food that way.
Yeah, you pretty much nailed everything there. I was just, the only 2 things that I personally am looking at right now for myself is sleep and water. So those are 2 of the questions that are on our questionnaire that we look at for clients. And then another one that I think is important for people to track that sometimes gets overlooked and that we ended up adding a little later to our questionnaire is cycle. So menstrual cycle, I think that is a big one that often gets overlooked because there are a lot of indications for that as far as what's going on throughout the rest of the week. So people will be like, oh my God, I was savage hungry. I don't know why. And then I go to the next page and it's like, exactly, starting tomorrow or like whatever. And it's like, okay, maybe we can start to every single bit of, regardless of if it's the 3 macros, if it's sleep, if it's weight, whatever the numbers are that we're using, it's all data. So it's all going to help us be able to create a story when things come up in the future. So that's how I like to use the numbers. It's not necessarily like you failed this week or you did. No, this is all data and we can use it moving forward. So I think, I mean, you nailed everything else. Like there's so much that you can kind of like track or keep in some sort of structure that doesn't have to make you neurotic, but will still keep you feeling like you are moving in the right direction. And then I think earlier I had said that I had 2 comments and I only made 1. I just wanted to say this out loud so that I can hear it on playback so I remember. I think it would be good for us to do a podcast maybe on like physique expectations throughout all of this because Laurin had said that you can have still a great healthy physique while implementing these untracked days, not tracking your food, things like that. But we need to be able to kind of tailor what is realistic in that time as far as what is considered a healthy and a good physique at that point.
Yes. Yeah, there's so many different factors there. So that would be a good podcast for sure. Yeah. So yes, you have it on record. We can do it. And then the last thing to kind of tie this back in is kind of when to transition back into tracking, because obviously we've talked a lot about today in this podcast, like, you know, the steps to take to kind of transition out of it. But that does not mean that we are opposed to having people track things. either partially or fully. And I think that's a big misconception that a lot of people will have after listening to this, or only half listening to something, right? People always kind of fill in the blanks what they want to hear anyway. So understanding the full picture, it's not necessarily one or the other. It's more of like oscillating between the two. It's kind of what I like to think about it as. Hey, like we're going in between these two. Sometimes it's fully one way, sometimes it's fully the other. And a lot of times it's a blend, right? So a good example would be like, say, I'm in a position to where it's like, hey, I've been tracking all these other things, right? I haven't necessarily been tracking 3 numbers. So naturally there's going to be fluctuations, right? And maybe I need to tighten up, right? For whatever reason, right? Like I want to lose a few pounds, or not even just that, like, let's say, not like a dieting goal, but like, hey, I need to make sure that my performance and my recovery is really on point. So I need to be a little bit stricter right now to change these variables and to see how they affect me. So that might be another reason, right? So there's so many different reasons. It doesn't just have to be like, hey, I want to lose weight, I need to start tracking again. It could be a performance goal, which is something that both of us deal with CrossFit, and then I'm doing jiu-jitsu, not currently, but in general, that was a huge change for me in my life. Obviously I've been lifting for a lot of years, so you kind of like get used to it, right? So it's not something that I really have to like monitor anymore. I kind of just almost intuitively know when I've had too much or too little, and training, recovery, whatever. But jiu-jitsu is a whole new thing for me, right? And I started to like a lot of the old habits that I had were no longer acceptable for what I was doing, right? I would stop eating a lot earlier and I still do that now when I'm not training. But like if I'm going and I'm there for 2.5 hours, and I'm not gonna, like, I would come home when I first started and like I wouldn't have anything, right? And I was like, man, I'm like not really feeling that great. So like, no, I have to have protein after, I need to have carbs, like some kind of snack, like extra water, like I have salt beforehand, like there's all these things that I need to do. So sometimes we have to go through periods of being a little bit more stringent with our tracking for whatever goals that we have. And that's where I think the oscillating in and out of it is so powerful, and having the ability to do both, right? If somebody said to me, hey, I need you to track, macros to the T for the next month, I have no problem doing that. Easy peasy. I've done it a million times. Likewise, if somebody says, hey, I don't want you tracking for the next month, anything, no scale, no whatever, easy peasy, I can do that too. So being able to kind of go through both of those, I think, is really important for, not only your physique and your performance, but also your mental headspace.
Yeah, you nailed it.
Oh,
that was literally right. Like, yeah, that was good. That was good.
Bam.
I like that you
cherry on top.
I like that you put the performance twist on it, because I genuinely believe that people only think that tracking is appropriate for people that are competing or on like a weight loss journey. I also think it's appropriate for people that are just trying to gain a better ability to eyeball food. So you maybe see portion sizes for a bit. So like this can go from the beginner to the advanced. And now I think it's personally something I'm going to do again. I don't know. But I think that it's important to kind of have experience in both. And now it's just made me a better coach, because I can see what I think might be appropriate as an outsider to somebody else that's going through some of these things. So, but yeah, I think it's appropriate to maybe go back into that when you have some changes in performance goals. And especially if you're somebody that maybe chronically undereats and you just want to make sure that you're getting enough at some point. So maybe you, because sometimes I'll see this with clients, like start incorporating untracked meals, and it's like their weight starts to drop. And maybe that is a sign to me that they are under eating on those days. And again, does it typically balance out? Sure. But if somebody has a goal in the future of competing, we need to make sure that the surplus is there. So there's a bunch of different reasons why it might be appropriate, but I don't think that it can be pinpointed to one specific circumstance, one type of person. And it doesn't mean you're right or wrong if you do or don't do it, but it needs to be done in an appropriate manner for the right reasons.
Yeah. And when you say things like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to track again, meaning track 3 numbers, you've done that for so many years that you still have a really good grasp on this. And we always go back to this kind of terminology. And this, again, was something that I really learned in my master's program, but now even more so coaching more people, is that having baseline food education is the most important thing that we can do. So if somebody doesn't have that, we need to work on that. So that means, portion control, that means measuring stuff, that means tracking, and you can't bypass that step. You can't say, oh, I wish I knew what was in food, but I never want to track anything. No. You got to do that for a while. But what we're talking about is actually being able to have this kind of food flexibility being able to go between these two things. So when Laurin says something like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to track 3 numbers again, that's because she's done it for the past 8 years. You know what I mean? So it's not because it's not for lack of understanding and having a good grasp, and she can easily go back, and all of the stuff that you're still structuring is still because you understand what to eat and how much to eat and when to eat.
I also, last comment on this, I think it is very important to really take a step back and analyze your mindset as to maybe why you want to go back to this. So if you're somebody that is just feeling a little anxious about maybe not tracking, or it's just more comfortable for you to have somebody to control and you just really want to use tracking as that crutch, like, not appropriate. We need to get you outside of that comfort zone and really push you to have some normalcy. So if this is something that's coming from more of a disordered, I need control over this, not appropriate to go back to tracking. And just because it's harder to not do that does not mean that it's not right to do that. So
exactly. And that's where, having quality coaching comes in. That's
Correct.
where having guidance comes in. That's where tracking other things comes into play.
Yes.
That's where, hey, we have other goals that we're trying to hit and other things that we're trying to focus on. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can send us a message. What's your Instagram, Laurin? I don't want to say it wrong.
It's just my name, Laurin Dorico. That's it.
Okay, spell it out.
Oh, okay. It's Laurin, Derrico.
Okay. And then mine's just Laurin Conlon. And so it's both of our names. So just spell them right. You're supposed to be blonde. You're just like at blonde.
I need to make an adjustment because
that might be taken, but if it's not, you should probably go for it.
If I just do that, oh God.
Just at blonde. But yeah, so anyways, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. You can also send an email to the team email, so info@teamlocofit.com. Never too busy to help you guys. We want to, help you reach your goals. And I know this is a huge kind of Pandora's box of topics. So we really want to help out in that area. So thank you guys so much. 10-star review, and we'll catch you next week.